I will comment the beginning of Die Lehre vom Sein, the Doctrine of Being, in the Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences. I will comment the paragraphs 84, 85, in the 84 and 85 in the German edition, the official complete works of Hegel. And I will read the German words when I feel the need to, because the concepts are better expressed in German, but I will always translate in English. And if you are interested, I ask you to focus, to concentrate, because this is as important as it can get, because it is about logic, being, and God eventually. So do not focus on me. You can skip the video and just listen to the sound, if you will. I will try to make the notions, the concept, as intelligible as I can. So I read in German and I translate them in English. Also, I put in the description below the links to 2 channels, there are probably many more, which teach you German. These are young, attractive women who teach German for beginners. So if you are interested in learning German, if you have leisure, you can follow these channels. There are probably many others. And yeah. So paragraph 84, Die Lehre vom Sein. First, a brief introduction. What is being? Being is a verb which exists in most languages, I guess. What do we mean when we say that something is? What is being? That's a question. When we say what we mean is determinations. What is this? What do you want? What do you expect? What should you do? You expect determinations, characteristics, properties, qualities to be features, if you will, to be given. But what is a determination? Where does the concept of a determination comes from? And these are the kind of questions that Die Lehre vom Sein, the Doctrine of Being, tries to answer. So that's an introductory. The paragraphs 84 and 85 are just introductions to the concept of being. Das Sein, which means being. Das Sein ist der Begriff nur an sich. Being is the concept only in itself. What is being? What is a concept? Hegel, in his logic, tries to answer these questions. The logic, die Wissenschaft der Logik, the science of logic, contains the moments of being, essence, concept. In everyday language, we talk constantly about being, things that are. Sometimes, and most of the time, we talk about essence. What is the essence of music, the essence of poetry, the essence of Europe? What is the concept? The concept of being, the concept of essence, the concept of a concept, the concept of a tree, the concept of a man, the concept of God. So what is being, what is essence, what is concept? We use spontaneously these various words, this terminology in our everyday language, but do we really know what they mean, what they are? These are the kind of questions that the science of logic seeks to answer. So being is the concept only in itself. And to illustrate with sensuous representation the development from being, essence, concept, Sein, Wesen, Begriff, would be like the seed, the plant, and the flower or the fruit. The concept is the fruit or the flower, the essence would be the plant, and being would be Sein. So they are one, but they are differentiated nonetheless. They are a process, they are a development, and the seed and the plant are contained logically, ideally, in the fruit, and the opposite is true. The fruit, the flower, the plant, with the roots, the branches, the leaves, is contained within the seed. So they are all contained within one another, and their truth, I will explain what truth is in a Hegelian perspective, is their development. So the seed, the plant, the flower, the fruit, and eventually the fruit gives birth to new seeds, which will grow eventually and give birth to plants, flowers, fruits. This process is an illustration in representation in ordinary consciousness of what the science of logic is. And here we are only interested with being. Die Bestimmungen desselben sind Seiende. The determinations, die Bestimmung is the determination. Die Bestimmungen, so the determination of being, are Seiende. Here it's difficult to translate because the difference between Sein and Seiende in German is the difference between being and being. There are no two words to illustrate in English. That would be Sein would be not being but be, and Seiende would be being. So Seiende is being. It cannot be translated. That's why I am speaking German, because it's clearer in German. So Seiende is the process of being. Seiende is to sein what the process of being is to being. But there is only one word in English, and in French and in German we have two words. So that's why I speak German, to illustrate. So the determination of being are being in their difference, in ihrem Unterschiede, andere gegeneinander. In their difference, they are other from one another. So when you have a determinate being, that which we call Dasein in German, so a being, because being is not a being. A being implies in its logical concept another being. If you say there is a being, it means that there is another. It's not the whole of being. Being, just being, is being. But a being is a determinate being in relation with another. So it is differentiated, it is limited, it is determined. This is what Hegel means when he says, in ihrem Unterschiede andere gegeneinander. In their difference, they are others to one another. Und ihre weitere Bestimmung, die Form des Dialektischen, ist eine Übergehen ins Anderes. So the further determination, which is the form of dialectics, the movement of dialectics, I will illustrate later, but I'm just commenting sentence by sentence. They're progressive, continuous. These are not proper words, but I use representation and ordinary vocabulary and terminology to illustrate what is meant. Ihre weitere Bestimmung, their forward determination, is a passage, ein Übergehen, a passage in otherness or in another. So being is the process of determination into which the determinations are opposed to one another. Diese Fortbestimmung ist in einem ein Heraussetzen und damit Entfalten des an sich seienden Begriffs und zugleich das in sich Gehen des Seins, ein Vertiefen desselben in sich selbst. That's quite complex, but what it means is that Fortbestimmung, it's this forward determination, this progress of determination forward, is an exposition. Heraussetzen, to expose, means to set outside, to posit outside, towards the exterior. Und damit in sich gehen means to go into oneself. So the process, the Fortbestimmung, the movement, the self-determination of being consists in going out of itself, exposing itself, and going into oneself, retreat within itself. So being is a movement, a process of exposition and inward-ization, going inward, to go into the depth of being. This is the movement of being. Okay. And what I can say is that being is a self-determining process. Being consists in determining itself, exposing itself, going into itself. And we have a name for what we call self-determination, namely to set oneself, one's own determinations, decision, will, choice, plan, ambition, whatever. And the self-determination in ordinary English language is called freedom or liberty. Freedom. To be free can be envisioned as the absence of any determination, but it is also a self-determination. I am free to choose my job, my religion, my apartment, in a supermarket. If I have the money, I am free to buy this or that. I am free to marry this girl or this man. I am free to do whatever I want in my leisure time, whatever. And when you are chained, we have the idea that when you are chained, you are not free because the determinations, your chains, are not your own. When you are a slave, you are the possession of your master. You are not free. In the realm of politics, libertarians, they believe that paying taxes, having one's property taken away from oneself by the state is an absence of freedom because the state is alien. It's different from them. They do not recognize their own will in the state, and they want to self-determine, to choose what to do with their life and not to be told by an other, the bureaucracy, the state, whatever, to do what they want. But to want, to have a will, means to impose determinations within the external world. If I want to drink water, I take this bottle, who was there, now it is here, I open I don't know how to call it in English, and I drink water. This is what I think is my will as of now, is to change the determination of being, spatial determination, and to drink water. And I feel free when I do this because I recognize in my act of drinking my own inner determination. So that's how we experience freedom. But I will not develop a lot about freedom, but the question is, if you, I already talked about this, if you love eating sweets, sugars, candies, you might imagine that when you see a sweet candy, you are free if you can eat the candy. But then the question from a philosophical standpoint is, where does your taste for sweetness comes from? Is it really yours, or are you determined by, for instance, your sociobiological past to be attracted by sweetness? And if it is your sociobiological past, because in the past, the story says, our ancestors, when they ate sweets sweets, products like fruits or honey, it gave them more energy, so they were able to reproduce better, to have more offspring, to take care of their offspring better, so they left more offspring. So we inherited this taste for sugar and sweetness from our ancestors. That's the sociobiological story. So there are two ways of considering this. Either you say, if I cannot eat this sweet cake, I am not free. Someone prevents me from eating because I lack the money, because I have not baked the cake myself, or whatever. That's one aspect. And another says, but if the taste for sweetness is not my own, but that of my sociobiological, anthropological ancestors, am I really free in enjoying the sweet taste of the cake? Wouldn't I assert my freedom by renouncing the cake, even though I enjoy it? That's a question. That's the question that alcoholics or people who are in excessive love of food, they ask themselves, if you are an alcoholic, are you free when you drink alcohol, or are you enslaved? When you are a drug addict, you enjoy taking drugs, but is it free? Is it freedom to take drugs? Or would the ultimate freedom be the renouncement of drugs and the renouncement of beer and alcohol and wine for the alcoholic, or the renouncement of an excess of food for the obese person? That's a philosophical question. But here Hegel says that being is a self-determining process, so being is free. That's why Hegel That's what he said that Hegel, the philosophy of Hegel, is the philosophy of freedom, because being is precisely a self-determining, which means a self-limiting process, so that the determinations of being do not come from outside of being, but from being itself. That's why being is free, in the view of Hegel, because there is no other outside of being who sets determination within being. Being is self-determination. That's why being is free. Okay, paragraph 85. Das Sein selbst sowie die folgenden Bestimmungen nicht nur des Seins, sondern die logischen Bestimmungen überhaupt können als Definitionen des Absoluten, als die metaphysischen Definitionen Gottes angesehen werden. So, being itself, as well as the following determinations, not only of being, but eventually all the logical determinations in general, can be envisioned as definitions of the absolute, as metaphysical definitions of God. So, all the logical categories, starting with being, and all the following determinations which are found within being, and then within essence, and then within the concept eventually, are the metaphysical definitions of God. And that's why Hegel's philosophy is sometimes defined as onto-theological. Onto is a Greek word which means being. Theo is a Greek word which means God or the divine, and logical is a Greek word which means the speech, the discourse, but also logic. So the philosophy of Hegel is ontological, theological, and logical. So being, God, and logic are one for Hegel. Okay, so the reason why I asked you to concentrate, to focus at the beginning of the video is because we are dealing with the most important topic there can be, namely God. What is God? What is what? What is a determination? When we say what is God, we ask determinations to be given. But where does determination come from? Hegel will show it comes from pure being, but before asking oneself what is God, one has to ask oneself what is being? And this is the beginning of logic. Näher jedoch immer nur die erste einfache Bestimmung einer Sphäre und dann die dritte, als welche die Rückkehr aus der Differenz zu einfachen Beziehung auf sich ist. So, Hegel says, Hegel is a Trinitarian thinker in a way. What he means is that only the first simple determination of a sphere, of a logical sphere, and then the third as a coming back into oneself out of the difference to a simple relation to itself, only the first and the third are real, for lack of a better word, metaphysical definitions of God. And the second moment, which is the moment of differentiation, separation, alienation, is not really God, so to speak, although it's a moment of God. So what he means is that we have this process in Hegel's philosophy of, to simplify, 1, 2, 3, which in the vocabulary of Hegel is immediacy, mediation, and the third moment is the re-establishment of immediacy, but it is not the same immediacy as in the first moment because it contains within itself the moment of the mediation and the abolition, the Aufhebung, as he says, of the mediation. So immediacy is that which is in itself. Mediation is that which is set by another. What is mediated is that which exists through the mediation of another. To illustrate, the media, that's the same word, the media, the mass media, the news. We acquire information about the world through the mediation of the media. They are the mediative agents of our information of the world. And the third moment is a return to immediacy after having negated the negation, which is mediation, and re-establishment of unity. But the third moment is a return to the first, but it is not the same as the first because it contains within itself the difference, the negation, the separation, the mediation. And another way of expressing this Trinitarian movement of Hegel is abstract, negation, concrete. What is immediate is partly abstract. The mediation is the negative moment, the negation of the immediacy and the negation of the abstraction. And the moment of the concrete is the reestablishment of the unity, which at first was abstract, but now contains within itself the negation and has been enriched, in the words of Hegel, by the negative. Okay. That's the formal aspect of Hegel. Immediacy, mediation, return to immediacy after having negated the mediation, or abstract, negation, concrete. What in old textbooks about Hegel is defined as thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And people who are very vaguely familiar with Hegel, they say, oh, that's Hegelian dialectics, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. But have they really thought thoroughly about what Hegelian dialectics is or is not? Because dialectics precisely is that which it is not. So but that's more complex. Okay. Then Gott metaphysisch definieren heißt dessen Natur in Gedanken als solchen ausdrücken. So to define God metaphysically means to express his nature in thoughts. And nature here is a vocabulary, a word, a terminology which kind of can be replaced by essence or concept. When we ask what is the nature of an object, what is the nature of God, we ask what is the essence of God, what is the concept of God. So nature can mean it can be synonymous with essence and concept, but at this moment in the process of logical development, there is no essence and no concept, just being. So to define God metaphysically is to grasp, to conceptualize, to express what God is in thoughts, because metaphysical is that which is above the physical, and this is the thought, thinking mind. Die Logik aber umfasst alle Gedanken, wie sie noch in der Form von Gedanken sind. So logic incorporates, grasps, contains, includes all thoughts when they are still in the form of thoughts. So logic is the totality of all thoughts in the form of thoughts, pure thoughts, immaterial thoughts. And I will illustrate. I will talk about this later on in my commentary, but to illustrate. When we say change, increase, decrease, development, modification, evolution, transformation, these are words, ideas in a sense that everyone understands. We constantly say that things change, increase, decrease, are modified, are transformed, etc. But these are in a way thoughts, but they are sensuous thoughts. When we say change or increase, we have a representation in mind. The weather changes from rain, wind, sunshine. Eventually, that's a representation of change, the change of the weather. When we get older, our faces change. We get older. When our hair grow, they increase in size. These are examples. When we earn money, the amount on our bank account increases. When we spend money, the amount decreases. But why are not these ideas, change, modification, transformation, increase and decrease they are, but change, modification, transformation, development, evolution, we imagine to evolve, you can there's Darwinian evolution, but there's personal evolution. You change your ideas, you grow, you develop. Evolution, change, development, transformation. These ideas are not contained in the logic because they are sensuous. But if they are thought about in their pure abstraction, what is contained in these ideas? The idea of becoming. And we will see later what becoming is. Becoming is the unity of being and nothing. So in all these illustrations of the idea of becoming precisely, when something is transformed or modified or changed, or when something develops or evolves, we have the idea that something becomes. And we do not find these ideas in the logic because we only find the pure abstract ideas. We find the idea of something and the idea of becoming, but once you've grasped the idea of something and becoming, and eventually intensity and extension are also found in the realm of quantity. So then when you have the concept of becoming, something, extension, intensity, you can deduce by your sensuous ordinary experience of the world all the following determinations: change, modification, transformation. If you want to analyze what transformation means, if you think abstractly, you will find eventually the idea of something becoming something else, to simplify. So that's why Hegel says that the logic contains all the thoughts in the form of thoughts, of pure thoughts. Die zweiten Bestimmungen, als welche eine Sphäre in ihrer Differenz sind. Dagegen sind die Definitionen des Endlichen. So the second moment. 1, we have unity. 2, we have difference. 3, we have unity re-established after difference, because 3 is the unity of 1 and 2. I simplify. So he says that die zweiten Bestimmungen, so the moment of the two, the second, the opposition, is the moment of the difference. And the moment of mediation, difference, negation, is the moment of the finite. Das Endlichen. What is finite? Because what is finite is what is in relation with its not self. Something is finite because it is in relation with something else. And something is limited by something else. I will talk about this later. So, immediacy is infinite, but not really. And mediation is finite, limited, different. And real infinity is the reestablishment of immediacy through the mediation of the mediation. And the relation to self in another is the infinite. That's why the real infinite is the third moment. And philosophy is the knowledge of the infinite, which is God or spirit. But then Hegel says, wenn aber die Form von Definitionen gebraucht würde, so würde sie dies enthalten, dass ein Substrat der Vorstellung vorschwebt. So here's that Hegel in his really demanding. He says that if we define the very use of a definition, there's already too much representation. It's not abstract enough to say that God is being. That's a definition. It's already too much in connection with ordinary consciousness. You have to go even further in the pure abstraction, the pure realm of thought, and abolish the definition. So here, that's Hegel at its most demanding, because Hegel is really a pure thinker. You have to elevate yourself above every representation and enter the realm of pure thought and abandon vocabulary, ordinary vocabulary, terminology, representation, images, and go into the pure abstraction of thought. This is what is required. Because he says, if we try to define the absolute in a definition, the absolute is the infinite, for instance, the very form of the definition to say that there is the absolute on one side, then there is the word is, and then there is the infinite, for instance, the absolute is the infinite, we have a difference between the absolute and the infinite. So neither the absolute nor the infinite are infinite nor absolute because of the very form of the definition, of the judgment, of the expression. So here that's really philosophy at its most demanding from a conceptual, intellectual standpoint. Okay. Now I will comment the Zusatz, because the Encyclopedia is structured in such a way that there are the paragraphs, which are the pure concepts. It's very dry, abstract, very demanding intellectually. And then, hopefully, one might say, there are the Zusätze, which officially are notes or Erklärungen, enlightening explanations, one could say, officially written by Hegel, the philosophy teacher, for his students. So the official story is that these Zusätze, which are additions, clarifications, are notes taken by his students. That's the official story. So it's a lot more intelligible, but the purpose is to eventually to understand the concepts in their pure abstraction and the illustrations. So I will comment the Zusätze. He says that what he calls the logical idea, the idee, the logical idea, is a totality of determinations, of logical determinations, and a presentation of the absolute. The absolute, which is even more or less maybe than God. So there is God, there's the absolute. The relationship between God and the absolute is, we think of God as a person, as a he, whereas the absolute, the subject and the object are vanished, maybe. So what Hegel calls the idea, the idee, is the totality of all logical determinations. And where do these logical determinations come from? And why are they the way they are? Because of the self-unfolding, self-determining process of being. And being eventually becomes many things. These are the kind of profoundly speculative jokes that I make unconsciously to say that being becomes many things. Maybe someday speculative philosophers will watch this video and acknowledge that speculative humor is really good. I can't help but have a spiritual laughter when I think about these kind of speculative jokes. That's not the kind of jokes that the ordinary person finds very funny. If I say that being becomes many things, at first sight it's not very funny, but from a speculative standpoint that's quite comical. So being becomes eventually essence, and essence becomes concept. That's what I said at the beginning: the seed, the plant, the flower, the fruit. Okay, so he says then that the three degrees, the three modes, the three moments, the three stages, here we are in the realm of vocabulary and terminology. The three stages, the three moments, the three modes of being are quality, quantity, measure. Qualität, Quantität, mass. So Hegel says when we try to say what is being, being is or becomes or unfolds or develops as quality, quantity, measure. And he says when in ordinary consciousness we say what are things, what things are, when we predicate being to things, we qualify them, we quantify them, and we measure them eventually. Die Qualität ist zunächst die mit dem Sein identische Bestimmtheit. Quality is identical. Bestimmtheit is determinacy. The distinction between Bestimmtheit and Bestimmung is very subtle. One could say that Bestimmtheit is more abstract than Bestimmung, so determinacy is more abstract than determination. And the distinction between determinacy and determination is a determinacy. It's a Bestimmtheit. So that's quite complex. But what it means is that the quality of a being, when I say a being, it's important. In German, that's Dasein. Because being, as I will show in the development, being, pure being, has no quality. But Dasein, determinate being, a being, is a qualitative being. And to say that something is means to predicate a quality, to qualify. And here we're not talking about good quality, bad quality. That's in the realm of judgment. But to say that a bad book, when I say a bad book, I say it's a bad quality, but that's the ordinary meaning of quality. Here, when I say a bad book, I qualify an object. It's a book. It's something. It's an object. It is real. It exists. These are qualifications. And in grammar, in my language, in French, we have qualitative adjectives, and to say that something is bad is a quality, in the sense that when you say this book is bad, you qualify. So there's this distinction in ordinary consciousness, the idea that quality is good quality, but bad quality is quality also. So here we're not in the realm of judgment, we're in the realm of pure Bestimmtheit, determinacy, Bestimmung, determination, and qualification of being. So he says that etwas aufhört, das zu sein, was es ist, wenn es seine Qualität verliert. Something, etwas, ceases to be what it is, was es ist, when it loses its quality. Something is what it is because of or through its quality. And the illustration given by Hegel is a field. To say that something is a field, a piece of land, I'm not talking about electromagnetic fields, I'm talking about agricultural fields. The field is the quality of the object that you're trying to define. If you transform the field into a garden, if you plant vegetables and seeds into the field, the quality changes. The field becomes a garden. If you build a house on the field, the quality changes. It becomes a house eventually. A property. A house and a property. If you have a forest, if you, next to the field there's a forest, let us imagine. If you cut off the trees of the forest, the field becomes bigger. So you do not change, you change the quality of the forest becomes a field if you take off all the trees, but you change the quality of the forest, so the forest loses its being, it ceases to be a forest and it becomes a field, but the field that was next to the forest, now it becomes a bigger field, a larger field. So the first field, which was next to the forest, if you remove the forest, the field loses not its quality, but its quantity. It ceases to be a determinate quantitative field and becomes a bigger, larger, wider field. A bigger field. But the forest loses its quality. The forest was a forest and now it's a field. So that's the process of being. Another example. If you have a house, if you build a new room or a garage, you increase the size of the house. That's a quantitative determination. So the house is still a house, but now it's a bigger house. So the quality remains, only the quantity changes. But if you build not one new room or one new garage or one wing of a house, but if you build 2, 3, 5, 10, 100 rooms, the quantity will change, but the quality will change also, because your house will become a mansion eventually. And this is very profound. This means that qualitative determination or Bestimmtheit is one with being. Quantitative determination or determinacy, Bestimmtheit, is indifferent to being. The field can grow larger. The house can grow bigger. But there comes a moment, a quantitative determination, where the indifferent quantitative change, the increase of quantity, turns into a qualitative change. If you build 50 new rooms in your house ceases to be a house, it loses its quality, and it becomes a mansion. Another illustration. You have a village of 500 inhabitants. That's a village. That's the quality. If you go from 500 inhabitants to 600 inhabitants, the population of the village has increased. Probably new houses have been built, or formerly abandoned houses have been settled. So if you go from 500 to 600, that's a quantitative change. And a quantitative change is indifferent to being. The village is still a village. Now there are 700 inhabitants. New birth, migrants, I guess, in the Western world. So now you have 700 inhabitants. That's still a village. Quantity has increased, but being has remained identical. The quantitative change is indifferent to the qualitative aspect. The village is still a village whether there are 500, 600, or 700 inhabitants. But there comes a moment, we don't know exactly when and how, or at the precise moment, but if you keep increasing the population of a village, let us say to 1,500, the village eventually becomes a small town. So the quantitative difference, the quantitative change, which was indifferent, 500, 600, that's basically the same if you try to qualify the object, namely the village. 500, 600, 700, that's indifferent. I mean, it makes a lot of differences because there are more jobs created, more people who go to the bakers, more life, more life. But the quality remains the same. But there comes a moment, which is a quantitative determination, where the village will become a small town. And if you go from 1,500 inhabitants to 3,000 inhabitants, that's a town. At least in my country, a village of 3,000 inhabitants is a small town. It may be different depending on the countries, but that's the idea. You get the idea. So it's not, let us assume that it's arbitrary, but let us say that 1,500 inhabitants is the limit, the quantitative limit, which becomes qualitative, and this quantitative limit which becomes qualitative is what we call measure. So the measure of a village, let us say arbitrarily, it can be different, but just to illustrate that it's 1,500 inhabitants. Does it mean that if you have 1,499 inhabitants, you are a village, but then a baby is born, and now there are 1,500 inhabitants. So now the birth of the baby turns the village into a town, a small town. But then an old person dies. We go back to the village. Now there are 1,499 people again. So for a brief moment, we were a town. Now we are again a village. Maybe we need migrants to restore the balance. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So that's the idea of measure. And to illustrate, if the village becomes prosperous and successful, and now there are 10,000 inhabitants, and then eventually 100,000, and eventually 10 millions. I don't know what the vocabulary is, but the vocabulary is not important. I just want to illustrate the idea. And ordinary vocabulary is derived from logical ideas. So with 1 million inhabitants, that would become a city eventually. And the history of Rome in antiquity is the story of a small village. Rome, mythologically founded upon the hills of the Latium by Romulus and Remus. Rome was a small village of agriculturists, farmers, and soldiers, and it became a town and eventually the capital of the ancient world, the Roman Republic with the provinces and eventually an empire and eventually the center of the ancient world. And then it moved to the Byzantine, Constantinople, Byzance and Constantinople. But that's the illustration that a village can become a town, a city, a capital. Yeah. And I guess that Boston or New York, I am not an expert in American history, but at the beginning, when the first settlers arrived officially, Boston and New York were there were no modern European houses and buildings, and it had to be built, and it developed, and that's the story of the Pilgrim Fathers and yeah. Okay, so that's what Hegel says. Die Quantität ist dagegen die dem Sein äußerliche für dasselbe gleichgültige Bestimmtheit. So quantity is exterior to being. It is indifferent. It's an indifferent Bestimmtheit, an indifferent determinacy. That's what I have illustrated. And he says, for instance, a house remains a house, whether it's bigger or smaller. Red, the color red, remains red, whether it's darker or clearer, more intense or more clear. Red, we have, then again, it's we learn when we are kids the differences between the various colors, clear blue, dark blue, blue, and there are many variations, quantitative determination of colors. But here, from a physical standpoint, you can have various quantitative determination of color. Color is a quality. Clear, intense, dark is, in terms of colors, is a quantitative determination. But eventually, if you go beyond a certain quantitative determination, the qualitative aspect changes. You change the measure. And in physics, the different colors that we see, they are wavelength of the electromagnetic field. Light and the various colors of light are quantitative differences. The quality is wavelength, electromagnetic vibrations. The quantity is the intensity, the aids, the speed, I'm not an expert in quantitative determinations of physical. I cannot speak in English about physics, but you get the idea. And the difference between red, blue, purple, and eventually orange, these are qualitative. They appear to us as qualitative, but they are from the point of view of the physicist, these are quantitative differences. And here we have the categories of continuity, discretion, but it comes later. Yeah. And another, I will comment Hegel. The third mode, degree, moment, stage of being, das Maß, the measure, ist die Einheit der beiden ersten, the unity of the first two moments, quality, quantity. die qualitative Quantität, the qualitative quantity. Alle Dinge haben ihr Maß. All things have their measure. They are quantitatively determined, so they can be bigger or smaller, and to increase or decrease the size, the quantitative determination of the thing is indifferent. But this indifference to the quantitative change has its limit, and the overthrow of the quantitative limit, the trespassing of the limit through a bigger or smaller quantitative change, which at first seems indifferent, but when you trespass, go beyond, transcend the quantitative limit, at some moment, the quality changes. I will take a psychological example. When people are annoying, there's a certain amount of tolerance to being annoyed, but when you are very pissed off and annoyed and really annoyed, you become angry at some moment. So these logical determinations exist in the realm of psychology. Yeah. And another illustration of measure. We have continuity and discretion, but at this moment, we're just in the introduction. Continuity and discretion have not yet come out of being. Being has not yet determined itself to be continuous or discrete and quantitative. But just to illustrate, it's like in the colors in physics. The question of race, I talk very often about this question. It seems that the differences between the various races or sub-races are qualitative. A white European is qualitatively different from an Asian Mongoloid. And you can see the features. A white person is different from a yellow Asian and from a black African. But these qualitative differences, as they appear to us in the realm of perception, actually they are quantitative. The difference between a white European, a Mongoloid, and a Negroid, and all the various sub-races, branches of mankind, this is a quantitative determination of genes. A gene is a qualitative thing. A gene is something, but it's also quantitatively determined. It's a certain determination of chemical structures, atoms, etc., etc. And let us illustrate. If a person is 98% European, he is white. He may have 2% of Asian, Northern African genes, whatever, or African genes, or whatever. But if you are 98% European, you are white. If you are 97% European, you are white. You will look white, very European, no doubt. 96%, you are still European. If you are 75% European, you will still be looked at as a white person, but already the physical features of your face will be different from the person who is 99 or 98% European. If you are 60% European, the likelihood that you look like a mixed-race person is very strong, and you will have features, European features, but you will be considered probably as mixed race. And if you are 50% European and 50% African, you will not look European at all. And if you are 50% European and 50% Asian, a child of a German and a Japanese will look more European than the child of a German and a Nigerian, because Europeans and Mongoloids, from a quantitative standpoint, are closer to one another than Europeans and Nigerians. That's why, to illustrate, I think Keanu Reeves, I think he's partly Asian, partly white, but Keanu Reeves looks white, but it's very subtle. His non-white Asian aspect is very subtle, but he looks white, although genetically he's partly white, partly Asian. So this is the illustration that a quantitative difference seems indifferent, but eventually, at some moment, there's some threshold of quantitative determination where quantity turns into quality. But we cannot say exactly when. You could arbitrarily define, say, if you are 75% European or above, you are European. If you are 75% European or less, you are not European. That's an illustration. This is the kind of ideas that structure the mind of white nationalists. Yeah. Okay. He said that these three forms of being, quality, quantity, measure, because they are the first, they are also the poorest, the most abstract. What is poor for Hegel is what is abstract. What is rich is what is concrete. And concrete doesn't mean sensuous objects. It means fully developed logical ideas. But I will come onto the distinction of abstract and concrete later. Das unmittelbare, sinnliche Bewusstsein ist, insofern sich dasselbe zugleich Denken verhält, vornehmlich auf die abstrakten Bestimmungen der Qualität und der Quantität beschränkt. So he says that the immediate sensuous consciousness, our ordinary consciousness, to the extent that one thinks, we think about the world with these abstract determination of quality and quantity. You go to the market or to the supermarket, you want to buy objects, things, products. You say what, you think about what should I buy, that's a qualitative difference, and how much does it cost? That's a quantitative determination. So in everyday consciousness, people think in terms of quality and quantity. But quality and quantity are very poor determinations. And yeah. So I wrote to answer the question, what is? What is what? What is a Determinacy, Bestimmtheit, and a determination, Bestimmung. So when we ask of anything, what is it? We unconsciously require that determinations be given, qualitative, quantitative, and or measure. Determinations of quality, quantity, and or measure. Then there are other determinations which belong to the realm of essence, like identity, difference, opposition, positive, negative, cause, accidents, effect, substance, etc. But here, when we say, what is it that bothers you? Unconsciously, we demand that qualitative determinations, quantitative determinations, and measure be given. And also the idea, what we consider to be concrete objects. This book, this bottle of water, we call this concrete because it's fully determined, it's present, it seems to be very real, and indeed it's partly real. But this concrete aspect for Hegel is what he calls abstract. So Hegel inverts the language basically, because if I asked what is this bottle, I would say it has a shape, a structure, a color, it's transparent, a content, water. So there is an outside and inside, a size, a weight. So I give determinations, physical, sensuous determinations of perception. It's one, it has many qualities, many properties, it's a thing. I could talk about this bottle for hours, but I won't. But when I say this, it's very abstract because this bottle is extracted from the process which brought this bottle into being. And if I wanted to explain how this bottle came into being, I would have to make a very long discourse about how bottles are produced, the factory in which they are produced, the matter, plastic, ink, which is used to color the bottle, how is plastic extracted, how is ink used. I would have to talk about the division of labor within the factory, how the workers are recruited. I would have to talk about psychology, about the history of the division of labor, about capitalism, how did capitalism come into being, Adam Smith, the Protestant mentality. I would have to talk about how this bottle has been shipped to the supermarket into which I bought this bottle. So logistics, I would have to talk about money. Why do people use money? I would have to talk about the reason why our bodies need to drink water in order to remain alive. Why do we need water? I would have to talk about biology. How did water come to Earth? I would have to talk about physics, about stars exploding, producing heavy atoms, the structure of the Earth. I would have to produce a universal, all-encompassing speech. And this, for Hegel, would be concrete. But if I say this bottle has a shape, a structure, if I give qualitative and quantitative determinations to this bottle, that's what Hegel calls abstract, because quality and quantity are very abstract determination, and concrete is the idea which contains within itself all ideas. So in order to say what is this bottle, I would have to produce an all-encompassing total speech. Yeah. So I would have to rewrite or interpret the entirety of world history in order to explain what this bottle is. And I would have to study Hegel's logic eventually. That's what I am doing. So, yeah. I have commented the paragraph 84, 85, and the Zusatz. So 2 pages. I tried to make this as intelligible as could be. And yeah.